Corv and Haze Lord Hayes. The name's Roderick. Roderick Pumperknickle. It wasn't a joke. Well, not entirely. To some, it sounded like an alias chosen by a man in desperate need of a second chance at life. To others, it carried the air of aristocratic absurdity, as if he had waltzed out of a century-old novel smelling of aged brandy and misplaced confidence. To him, it was Tuesday. Roderick Pumperknickle strolled through the opulent ballroom of the Sable Mirage Casino, wearing a black tuxedo tailored to irritation-inducing perfection. A glass of something expensive in his left hand, and the faintest smirk gracing his lips. He didn't smirk because he was pleased. He smirked because it made people wonder what they had missed. Across the room, a man was sweating bullets, probably because Roderick had relieved him of a silver key card to a vault containing the kind of secrets that made governments nervous. The poor fool hadn't even noticed. Not until Roderick had flashed him a dazzling grin and a knowing wink before turning on his heel and disappearing into the crowd. That was his way. No running, no shouting, no need for violence unless absolutely, hilariously necessary. Some spies relied on brute force, others on complex technology. Roderick, he relied on the overwhelming power of audacity. As he stepped toward the exit, a broad-shouldered security enforcer in an ill-fitting suit cut into his path. The man glared down at him, his arms crossed, a vague sense of irritation radiating from his forehead. "Sir," the enforcer grumbled, "we need to have a word." Roderick sighed, swirled his drink, and tilted his head in thought. "You look like a Gregory," he mused, eyeing the man up and down. "Or perhaps a Winston. Either way, I can already tell you have a rich internal world, one unappreciated by your superiors. Let me guess, you wanted to be an artist, but the family business called." The enforcer blinked. His lips twitched. Just a little. "Sir, I need you to come with me." Roderick exhaled dramatically, set his drink down on a passing tray, and buttoned his jacket with the ease of a man who had never lost a game of poker in his life. "Of course," he said smoothly, stepping forward, and right past the enforcer, patting the man's shoulder as he went. By the time the brute had realized what had happened, Roderick was already gone, vanishing into the velvet-curtained halls of the casino, with the kind of effortless charm that made people whisper his name in both admiration and frustration. Roderick Pumperknickle was on the move. And somewhere, in some dimly lit boardroom, someone was about to realize they had already lost. The Pumperknickle Gambit. Somewhere between the bar and the vault, Roderick Pumperknickle had acquired a martini. He wasn't quite sure how. Perhaps it had been handed to him. Perhaps he had manifested it through sheer force of personality. Either way, it was there now, swirling in his hand, existing with the same effortless confidence that he did. He took a sip. It was adequate. The hall leading to the vault was guarded by two men in matching suits. The kind of suits that were expensive, but not flattering, tailored with the precision of a blindfolded butcher. They stood with their hands clasped in front of them, projecting the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested they'd both been hired for their ability to frown very hard at things. Roderick approached, adjusting his cufflinks with the air of a man who had already won the argument they were about to have. "Gentlemen," he greeted, nodding politely. "Wonderful evening for some light treason, wouldn't you say? The guards did not respond. This was disappointing, but not unexpected. One of them, a particularly square-headed individual, shifted slightly. No one's allowed past this point without clearance. Clearance? Roderick arched a brow. Oh, I assure you, I have all the clearance in the world. Just ask Gregory, or Winston, out of the front. Lovely man. Dreamed of being an artist. Heartbreaking, really. The guards did not react. Roderick sighed, then reached into his jacket and produced the silver key card he had so graciously borrowed earlier. He held it up between two fingers, letting it catch the light. I believe this should suffice, he suggested. The guards squinted. Not in suspicion, but in the kind of deep soul-searching effort required when two men have dedicated their entire lives to standing in front of doors, must now confront an unprecedented situation requiring thought. The square-headed one glanced at his counterpart. Did anyone say someone else was coming? The other, a man who had all the alertness of a deflated beanbag chair, furrowed his brows. I don't know. Maybe. Roderick clapped his hands together. Excellent. We're all in agreement then. I'll just see myself in. And before either of them could protest, he stepped forward, past them, through the vault doors, and into the heart of the casino's secrets. The two guards stared after him. Squarehead blinked. Was that allowed? The beanbag of security let out a slow breath. I mean, he had a key. A pause. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And with that, they returned to their noble duty of standing very still in front of a door, completely unaware that the greatest spy that had ever encountered just outmaneuvered them using nothing but confidence, absurdity, and the sheer weight of their own incompetence. Somewhere inside the vault, Roderick Pumperknickle adjusted his tie, glanced at the heavily fortified security system, and took another sip of his martini. He had no idea what he was stealing, but he was absolutely going to steal it. Operation Unnecessarily Theatrical. The vault was a monument to overcompensation, lined with steel-reinforced walls, blinking security cameras, and lasers crisscrossing like an avant-garde art installation. It screamed, "Look how impenetrable I am!" Which, of course, only made it all the more embarrassing that Roderick Pumperknickle was already inside, adjusting his cufflinks and casually sipping his martini. The prize, whatever it was, sat in the center of the room atop a pedestal encased in glass. Because of course it was. The people who built this vault weren't just protecting something. They were making a statement. Unfortunately for them, the only statement Roderick ever listened to was his own. He walked toward it, unfazed by the lasers. He didn't duck. He didn't roll. Didn't do that unnecessarily athletic thing where spies contort themselves through security grids like a drunken game of Twister. No. That would require effort. And Roderick Pumperknickle was morally opposed to effort. Instead, he simply stepped through the lasers. They, in turn, did absolutely nothing. Because, of course, he had turned them off already. How? Well, that was the beauty of it. He had no idea. Somewhere between acquiring a martini and humiliating two guards via passive conversation, he had pressed a button, flipped a switch, or perhaps just willed it into existence by sheer personality. The important thing was that it worked, and now he stood before the object of someone else's deepest desires. Inside the glass case sat a black velvet box. Roderick arched a brow, setting down his drink atop a randomly important-looking control panel because consequences were for other people. With one effortless motion, he lifted the glass case, expecting an alarm to blare. Nothing. He frowned, disappointed. Not even a challenge. With a sigh, he flipped open the velvet box, expecting to find a diamond, a top-secret document, a USB drive full of national secrets. Instead, he found a rubber chicken. A single rubber chicken nestled in velvet, looking up at him with the deeply unsettling blank stare of something that had no business being this well guarded. Roderick tilted his head. He closed the box, opened it again. Still the chicken. He considered this deeply, as deeply as a man with a half-drunk martini and a borderline pathological aversion to taking things seriously could. And then, because ultimately he was not paid to ask questions, he simply picked up the box, tucked it under his arm, and turned on his heel. Exit stage left. By the time the casino realized they had been robbed, Roderick was already sitting at the bar of a seedy lounge in Budapest, nursing a drink and contemplating whether or not he should ask why an entire underground operation had been protecting a rubber chicken. He decided against it. "Not my monkey, not my show," he said. Because at the end of the day, Roderick Pumperknickle wasn't a man who needed answers. He was a man who made other people question everything. Yes. Pumperknickle forever. Budapest was exactly as he remembered it, which was remarkable, considering he had no memory of ever being here before. The lounge smelled of old wood, regret, and the kind of jazz that only plays when someone is about to make a terrible decision. A red light flickered in the corner, giving the whole place the aesthetic of a noir film that had been left out in the sun too long. Roderick Pumperknickle sat at the bar, the velvet box beside him, a fresh martini in hand, because, despite what the skeptics said, the world always had a fresh martini waiting for a man who walked like he belonged there. The bartender was a woman of indeterminate age and infinite disinterest. She had the weary expression of someone who had seen everything and was unimpressed by all of it. Her name tag read Olga, which felt right. Olga wiped a glass and gave him a glance that could charbroil a lesser man. "You want something? Or are you just here to make the air worse?" Roderick took a sip of his drink, savoring it, like a man who wasn't entirely sure if it was poisoned, but was committed to the experience anyway. "I'd love a good story," he mused. "Something with romance, betrayal, and impossible mild explosions." Olga snorted. "You want a bedtime story? Buy a book. You want a drink? Pay for that one first." He grinned. This is why he loved Budapest. But before he could continue charming her into a reluctant tolerance of his presence, the velvet box shifted ever so slightly beside him. Not a lot. Not enough for a normal person to notice. But Roderick Pumperknickle was not a normal person. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head, looking at the box, like one might look at an unsolicited love letter from an ex who once tried to set fire to your house. It did not move again. Olga followed his gaze, unimpressed. "Something wrong with your whatever that is?" Roderick opened the box. The rubber chicken was gone. In its place was a single playing card. The Jack of Hearts. A pause. A long, thoughtful pause. Roderick's face remained neutral, but inside, his soul let out the exhausted sigh of a man who had just realized the punchline to a joke someone told him 10 years ago. Because of course, it wasn't just a rubber chicken. It was one of those things. One of those elaborate, multi-phase, overly dramatic, completely unnecessary international puzzles that shadow organizations, rogue billionaires, and particularly bored, immortal beings love to orchestrate. And he had walked right into it. This was not the first time. Roderick picked up the card, flipping it between his fingers. It was worn, old, but not fragile, like something that had seen more than its fair share of bad decisions. On the back was a single gold-inked symbol, an infinity sign, stretched sideways like it was laughing at him. Olga raised a brow. What, is it cursed? Because if you start levitating or speaking in tongues, you're paying extra for cleanup. Roderick tapped the car on the bar, thoughtful. Cursed? No. Doomed to inconvenience me? Almost certainly. Olga shrugged. Sounds personal. It always is. And with that, he stood, dropping a few crisp bills onto the bar. Olga took them without so much as a thank you, because Olga was a woman of consistency. You take care of that thing, she muttered. Roderick Pumperknickle smirked, tucking the card into his jacket. I take care of everything. Eventually. And then, as if on cue, because it was always on cue, the lights in the lounge flickered. Outside, tires screeched. Someone shouted. A gun cocked. The game, whatever it was, had officially begun. Nobody does it pointlessly. 5 minutes later, Roderick Pumperknickle was casually strolling down the rain-slicked streets of Budapest, his hands in his pockets, utterly unbothered by the fact that at least 4 people were following him. They weren't subtle. They never were. The first was a man in a beige trench coat, which was a bold choice for espionage, but a terrible choice for weather. He was pretending to read a newspaper, which was tragic, because newspapers had been irrelevant for at least a decade. The second was a woman in a sharp red dress, hovering near a fruit stand, occasionally picking up oranges with the focused intensity of a woman who had never eaten citrus in her life. The third and fourth were a pair of bald twins in identical gray suits, whispering to each other like 2 halves of the same malfunctioning AI. Roderick sighed. Amateurs. He adjusted his tie, then, without changing his pace, took a sharp turn into a side alley. The 4 followed, because of course they did. They rounded the corner just in time to see nothing. No Roderick. Just an empty alley, a flickering streetlight, and a vague sense that Hay had made a mistake. The bald twins looked at each other, confused. The woman in red frowned. The man in the trench coat lowered his newspaper, revealing a completely unnecessary mustache. And then, from directly behind them, Roderick's voice. If you're gonna stalk a man through a foreign city, at least have the decency to do it with some flair. The 4 whirled. Too late. Roderick had already stepped past them, hands in his pockets, wearing the effortless smirk of a man who had just committed a crime so smoothly that the laws of physics were still debating whether or not it had actually happened. They stared. He winked. And then, without breaking stride, he disappeared into the night, leaving them with nothing but confusion, existential doubt, and the deep, undeniable realization that they had just been outclassed by the most ridiculous men alive. To be continued. Probably in a place with better martinis.